Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everyone is online now and has joined this webinar today. Great to see such a big outturn for this webinar. We've got over 200 registrants for this session. So hopefully this will spark a great debate and we can really make use of our great panel today. Just very briefly, good afternoon. My name is Jürgen Jansen. I am today's moderator on this webinar run by the Energy Storage World Forum. We will today discuss how to reach an agreement of the DSO-TSO role on the challenge of owning and operating energy storage within regulatory frameworks. There's a bit of a big question and big debate. So what will we be talking about? We'll mainly look at the current regulatory frameworks and the future trajectory. We'll look at the different opinions within our panel today on where to best locate storage, and really understand how different stakeholders stand in this debate and how they see things moving forward, which is great because we do have a very diverse set of speakers on today's webinar. Just to give you a quick bit of background, bit of housekeeping. So the webinar today is brought to you by the Energy Storage World Forum, and it will be a live panel discussion. So what you will be able to see on your screen is the video of the various panel members speaking during the webinar. And actually today's discussion is part of a series of webinars, articles, and interviews in the run-up to the Energy Storage World Forum, which will take place in Berlin from the 14th till the 18th of May 2018. The Energy Storage World Forum really is two specialist conferences that focus on both the residential and the large-scale energy storage market, and it provides a really unique program with a wide range of stakeholders represented. You can find a lot more information on this on the website energystorageforum.com, or you can join the debate on LinkedIn. There's a big group with more than 12,000 members called Energy Storage World Forum. And it's great to have you join today's session. And actually this takes me right into introducing our panelists, because we have three fantastic panelists on today's webinar, and all three of them will actually be present in Berlin in May, presenting on various topics in the various conference streams. So today we have three very diverse speakers. We have representation from project financing side, project development, and from the regulatory side. So let me start the introductions off with our first speaker on today's webinar. His name is Jim Lee, and Jim is a Senior Vice President within Macquarie Energy Leasing, where he focuses on energy efficiency and distributed generation. Jim has been with Macquarie for over 11 years, providing principal finance solutions to the energy and infrastructure sectors. I think it's also worth highlighting with Jim on the webinar. Jim, maybe quickly say hello, so you jump up on the screen.
Hi, guys.
There we have him. And what's worth highlighting that within Macquarie, Jim is helping to develop a funded turnkey battery finance solution called Grid Secure. And Macquarie is looking to install and fund behind-the-meter storage for medium-sized corporates in the UK, combining in a new business model that's based on share of revenues and savings generated by the battery, offering low cost of finance and clear energy savings to the customer, with Macquarie owning and operating the storage asset alongside that and earning part of the revenue streams. So that's the project financing side. It's great to have that represented. I think it's something that sometimes is cut a bit short in the current energy storage debate. But also what we shouldn't forget is the other side, it's the project development side. So we also have, as part of the webinar today, Andrea Pompa from EDF. Andrea, maybe just quickly wave a hello so everyone knows who you are. There we go. Nice to have you on board. Andrea is a regulatory analyst at French energy company EDF. He specializes in European and French energy regulation and is based out of Paris as part of EDF's innovation and strategy team. And he has got a lot of experience because he spent 5 years being a European electricity regulation advisor at Edison as well. So it's really good to kind of have that combination of the energy company, project development perspective, but also the knowledge of the European electricity regulation. And last but not least, we've got Dominique Jam. Dominique, again, same trick.
Hello, everybody.
There we go. Thanks for the wave. Dominique has been with the French energy regulator CRE for over 15 years in various roles, including power market design and electricity networks. And now, if I understand correctly, you're a special advisor to the president of CRE, providing input on industrial affairs, innovation, and future market development. And in fact, Dominique has been involved in setting up CRE's Foresight Committee, bringing together all relevant stakeholders from industry, consumers, experts, and academics. So it's really good to have all three speakers on board today. I think we'll have a great discussion. I encourage all attendees to ask questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we will then pick up the questions as we go. Before we start off, I'll just quickly introduce myself as well. Even though I'm merely your moderator for today's session, I think it's good if you know who you've got on board. So my name is Julian Jansen, and I'm a senior analyst at IHS Markit, the leading provider of research to the energy storage industry. And I've been specializing in energy storage for 4 years and lead IHS Markit's global research for stationary energy storage. So that's really it to the introductions. I think I've done enough talking for now. So I really want to get us started and get the first opinion and feels from the different panel members. So I'm going to start off things with a very quick and quite a broad question. So I'd be quite keen to get a high-level answer from all three of you. So in your opinion, what is the best location for storage to serve the requirements of the future energy system? So regardless of what current regulation might favor, what do you see as the best location? Is it on the transmission or the distribution system, or is it co-located with renewables, or is it behind the meter? And I think we've got quite a diverse set of speakers. So Dominique, maybe you can kick us off with your opinion from the regulatory side.
Thanks, Julian, for the introduction. I would say there is no clear answer, and surely it's not for a regulator or public body to decide what to tell. So from an economic point of view, I would say that utility scale storage obviously is most cost effective. It's less costly to build. It can win with price arbitrage on wholesale markets. It can provide services for the system operator. When you look at distribution storage, obviously it's more expensive, but it can deliver more value, because it can deliver the value to the system, transmission system, but also to the distribution network. So to ease some congestions, or to help yourself consumer to have a better matching between the production and the consumption, or to help a PV producer, etc., etc. So I would say distribution is where you have more cost, but you may have more value. So it's not an easy one to decide.
Okay, no, that's a very good, very interesting perspective, and I think we'll dig into that a little bit deeper later on. But maybe if we jump straight to you, Andrea. I mean, I know that EDF has been active both on the kind of co-location with renewables, grid assets, but also behind the meter. Where do you see storage role of being kind of most supportive for the future energy system?
Yeah, of course, it's not an easy answer. We can, as a general point of view, I think that the storage operators can help to value these assets on several services. That's the key to spur the development of this kind of technologies. So of course, the best location is where they can maximize the services they can storage operators can provide. We can, for example, as regards utility scale storage, we can identify valuable services for short-term balancing, for renewable energy integration, and also for transmission distribution deferral investment. So I think that it depends really on the grid situations, on the system. On the system and market situations in a specific country, even in a specific location within a country. But of course, I think that the perspective to value more than one service for a specific storage facility, it's a very important issue, and it should be considered when the location is identified. And of course, there is, as regards distribution system congestion management, there is a scope for the development of a market on that. And for example, competitive tendering could be a solution in order to identify the right location for new storage facilities to be installed for the provision of this specific service.
Okay, thanks for that perspective. Jim, do you agree with Dominique and Andrea, or do you fundamentally see a different place for storage?
I think from the finance side, there's a certain level of agnosticism about where the battery eventually gets stored in terms of where the finance opportunity lies. So there's pros and cons about each. So if you go on the DSO side, there's the, sort of, you think there might not be as much innovation, which would then create new sort of asset classes, new forms of technologies, which would then increase the range of financing opportunities. If you go co-location, again, you can increase the absorption rate of these technologies. But, where we're focused at the moment behind the meter, and the reason why we're focused at behind the meter is that a lot of, manufacturers that cannot sort of avoid what they have, peak prices here in the UK, they call them triads. So for manufacturers that have 24/7 operations, they cannot avoid these prices, and a battery can help a long way to mitigate that. A battery can also provide security supply and additional energy resilience. So that additional value point of the battery is not fully manifested for a co-location with with renewables. But at the same time, it is sort of on site for somebody else. It's behind their meter. And it's harder to deploy in concert with everybody else, and ultimately there is the ultimate opportunity of getting homeowners to have batteries as well. So I think there's opportunities in each one. There's pros and cons of each one. Our focus for now is behind the meter because that's where we see the most value being realized for the customer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a very nice summary. But I think what we can see here is that whether it's located behind the meter or just in front of the meter and alongside the distribution grid, it makes sense to provide value to both the customer and to the energy system, whether that's on a distribution or a transmission level. So, I mean, that really takes us to this magic term, value stacking. And we all talk about it in the storage industry. Everyone wants to make it happen. Everyone sees it as a core area in terms of making energy storage economical as it is today. But I think there's still a lot of challenges to get to a point where maybe from a regulatory side, value stacking is even enabled. So maybe coming back to you, Dominique, earlier, you mentioned, it's best to look at energy storage potentially on a distribution system, providing more value. But what do you see as the biggest barriers, maybe on a European, but also at a level in France, that kind of hinder that value stack, that hinder providing value to the customer and to the distribution system operator?
Well, you have to get some proposal of value, and you have to be competitive on the market. And well, now I'm only speaking for the French market. What we see at the moment is that it's not really competitive. Maybe because you have in France end users tariffs that are quite low compared to, for example, Germany. So maybe it's more difficult for that reason. But this is the basic reason. Honestly, I don't see a lot of regulatory barriers being responsible for avoiding storage development in Europe. Will come up maybe later on the clean energy package, but nowadays I would say that it's always possible to add up value on different markets. Some progress have to be made in order to allow in some markets the more aggregation between very small points on distribution systems. But in some countries, it's already the case. And I think it's developing in many countries, and the clean energy package will make it possible everywhere in Europe, I think.
No, I think that's a great point. And what you're saying there obviously means a lot of it comes down to the cost of storage and the development of aggregation technology. So, I mean, that's obviously one side to it. But I think the other side that's worth looking at is where the value stack is currently kind of hindered. And what we've seen in the US quite recently, and this will I'll be passing this on to you, Jim, but what we've seen in the US, obviously in California, clear statements around enabling value stacking, getting the utilities to value storage properly. FERC has just come out with a new ruling around how energy storage should be rewarded or remunerated in a correct way when it provides grid services. And I think today there's a lot of issues in Europe where that isn't the case. So maybe, Jim, on your perspective, you finance some assets in the US, you're looking to finance behind the meter storage in the UK. Do you think there's one big differences the way regulation is set up, or is it just the fundamental differences on the way the energy market is designed?
I think, so in terms of the revenue stacks, there are a lot of similarities between projects that we see in the US and some that we see in the UK. So frequency response, that is a core element of the revenue stack there, peak shaving, and trading the battery with energy suppliers or trading desks. And what's interesting in the US is that they actually have power markets that are a bit more sophisticated, or at least from the external, a bit more sophisticated, because you can actually, toll batteries out to trading desks, and they can actually offer you fixed terms on what they call Reg A and Reg D revenue streams, which are very similar to frequency response revenue streams, and those can go out 2 or 3 years. So right away, up to 3 years, that's a marked improvement over the UK, and it's not being offered via auction or via the grid or off-gem. It's actually being offered by trading desks. So that level of sophistication helps to sort of distinguish the US market, certainly from a finance and bankability point of view. And also there are state level subsidies in certain areas like California, as you mentioned, where up to about 80% of the battery through usage of tax credits and other kind of subsidies that the state offers can actually offset up to 80% of the capex value of the battery. So it's a very different proposition in certain parts of the states and the states overall than what we're seeing here in the UK.
Okay, yeah, no, I think that's certainly a good point, and I think subsidies or some form of direct and indirect incentives have played a key role in enabling kind of early market growth in the US, and I think now the regulatory framework is really catching up with that and is trying to advance storage maybe beyond the way subsidies can. And maybe that's a good point to kind of follow on then. I know we're maybe swaying a little bit from the core of the discussion, but I think it's an important point. Andrea, I mean, do we need subsidies in Europe that encourage energy storage? I know there's some subsidies, for example, in Germany or in Sweden or the Czech Republic. There's some new ones being introduced in Austria, but fundamentally, do you think we need subsidies to encourage energy storage in Europe?
In our view, storage should be encouraged, but within a market and regulatory framework which enable a level playing field between different technologies. So we don't think that specific subsidies could be a good solution. I tend to agree with the fact that there are not high regulatory barriers today which hamper the development of storage. But of course, we can evolve market rules in order to adapt them for a participation of energy storage and storage facilities at the same condition as other technologies. That's of course something that could be done on several market segments. Then there are energy policies can help and can increase the interest of energy storage. For example, if we think about policies for sustaining a right level of CO2 prices, that could be something which would increase the value of storage, and that could facilitate the integration of this technology in the market. So I think we have some levers to develop technologies, while keeping a technology neutral approach before going to direct subsidies, which then are difficult to phase out and could introduce other kind of distortions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a very good point you make in there around the technology neutral approach and maybe how that should be addressed on a European level. So that's maybe something for us to continue the discussion in that direction. But very briefly, just to everyone attending today's webinar, we've had a few questions come in already. I'd be very much encouraging you to type your questions in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of the screen. We've got lots of you listening, so it'd be great if you get involved drop a question, and we'll get the panelists to answer them, either if you have one specifically directed to either Andrea, Dominique, or Jim, or if it's a more wide-ranging question, we can address it to the entire panel. But maybe then going on the point you just mentioned, Andrea, around developing a technology-neutral approach, and maybe Dominique, you mentioned earlier the development under the clean energy package or the winter package. You know, to me, obviously, that was a big step in the right direction, addressing some of the big barriers hampering the business case for storage in Europe. But maybe before we get into that, you know, where are we on the energy package? What's kind of your latest inside view on how that's progressing? Because obviously it lays out nicely what should the European regulation look like in the future, but a lot of it hasn't been answered in a definite way. And you know, how long will it take till we actually have regulation that helps create a level playing field across Europe?
Right. So the question of the level playing field is important. As a regulator, I think we shouldn't meddle too much with the functioning of markets. So if we want to help storage develop, I think the right thing to do is to go with the technology demonstrators or things like that, like we do in France with Enedis or RTE, which are the main network operators. And so we, as a regulator, we allow them to run some demonstrators. Perhaps it's the best way to do things, better than to go with meddling with markets. So regarding the clean energy package, we have at that moment two versions of the text. One that has been adopted by the Council of Ministers, and another one adopted by the Parliament. And two different texts, but basically the same philosophy, and mostly some slight differences of degrees, but the philosophy is the same. And the philosophy is quite, you have the same philosophy for distribution and transmission. It's important to understand. So it's kind of first and third of the first question, distribution and transmission, they are treated the same in the clean energy package. And the Article 1 is the following is distribution system operators shall not be allowed to own, develop, manage, or operate energy storage facilities. And it's the same for transmission system operators. This is Article 1, and then you have three other articles with exceptions to this principle. But the long-term goal is this one. And you may have some derogations for main derogation, or if you have some kind of storage facility which is a fully integrated network component, and which is necessary for the distribution system operator to fulfill the obligation regarding safety, reliability, efficiency, etc. Then you have an exception. It has to be validated by the national regulatory authority. And in case you set in one member state an exception, then every 5 years, you have to look at it again, and you have to conduct some tenders in order to see if market players would be able to give the same service. And if this is the case, then you should go back to the normal state of affairs, I would say, whereas it's not for DSOs or TSO to own or operate storage facilities.
Okay, great perspective. So actually what comes out there is maybe that the clean energy package is a lot clearer than maybe some of the stakeholders in the industry believe, and I know there's a lot of lobbying from different parties going on. So what I can see here from what you've said, though, let's say this gets eventually put into place, and we see this developing, clearly saying that DSOs, TSO can't own or operate storage assets unless it's an integrated network asset. Let's go with that point of view. Do we then actually need a separate asset class for energy storage? Do we need a specific category for it? And maybe this is addressed to all three of you, so feel free to take that. But maybe Dominique, do we need a separate asset class for energy storage, or should it be a subset of generation, or should it not be defined at all?
Personally, I don't see the need for a specific subset where you have a storage, then you take some energy, and you inject some energy in the system. And I don't see why you should be treated differently as a consumer or a producer or a self-consumer doing both of them. So, maybe I'm wrong. I'm no certainty on that, but I don't see any need for a special category.
Okay, interesting. Andrea, do you agree with that, or do you think there should be a special category?
Yeah, I agree with Dominic. We have a preference to keep to keep storage asset within a non-regulated environment, so treated as the other production demand response technologies.
Okay, interesting. And so in that case, maybe to both of you, and this is a question we've had from one of the attendees today, do you think, let's assume there will be a separate asset class, which I know that some organizations, for example, the European Association for Energy Storage, is lobbying actually to develop a separate asset class. If that would be introduced, would that asset class accelerate or slow down the development of energy storage?
Honestly, I have no clue on that. I don't know. Well, you introduce a specific class, but then to what goal and what you gain with that? Well, for me, storage is a mean to give flexibility in the markets, or to offer flexibility to the network or to the system operator. So, but flexibility is a competitive process and market, and you have other means of flexibility. So, other than you have new technology and you have, it makes sense to help it at the beginning of the new technology. Other than that, I think we should have the goal should be a level playing field.
Okay, interesting. And maybe what's quite nice, actually, we've already provided some clarity on how to kind of maybe reach agreement on who should own and operate storage. So we got to that question quite quickly, which is fantastic. But maybe on the point that you now just made around the level playing field and offering flexibility, I had a question from the audience around technology neutrality and whether that helps to accelerate the energy transition. And your point would be, let's be technology neutral and see whatever can supply that flexibility to the system in the most cost-effective way. But then there's maybe some people arguing that actually batteries, for example, are the best asset or the best technology to provide that. So do you think that technology neutrality is actually a good thing, or should we maybe focus on certain technologies that are best positioned to provide such services?
In my view, the development of batteries is an excellent news. And if prices are going down, it's good, because we know that we will increase more and more the share of renewable with the intermittency. And so we will need more and more storage. And so the less costly storage is, the better it is. And well, obviously we'll see, the more you will get some renewable on the network, the more opportunities for storage of owners, operators, they will have on the market. So, well, maybe it's very simplistic view, but I don't see any need to change the rules of the game.
Okay, nice. See where you're coming from. And maybe Jim, what's your opinion on this? Because I think in a lot of American or US states, there's been clear commitments towards batteries. And, I think they're faring pretty well with that. So do you see, from your perspective, maybe to implement some of the business models you've looked at in the US, to implement those in the UK or in wider Europe? Do you think, actually European regulators and domestic regulators need to focus on battery storage and just clear the path for batteries? Or do you think that technology neutrality is the best way forward in flexibility markets?
Yeah. I think it might be hard at this stage in certain states to go technology neutral. Looking at the US and the UK, who has, specifically included and specifically excluded certain kinds of technologies above and below certain kind of capacity thresholds, where they might not name the technology, but they're pretty much saying, well, we don't really like that kind of, for example, peak diesel generators, the peaking plants that were installed over the States and even looked at here, when those were very specifically targeted by regulators. So, and on one hand, they have already made it not technology neutral. So it's going to be hard to unwind now, because otherwise, it's either you level the playing field and say, we just want best performance, and then everybody can sort of, all right, design the technology and back the right technologies to get there and bring down the supply chain to those various technologies. But if you start specifying one over the other, you kind of have to keep specifying the whole time. So I think it might be hard to go fully technology neutral. You know, and by technology neutral, sometimes I'm not sure if that is exactly what it means, because I mean, you can easily cut out one technology versus another. For example, vanadium batteries versus lithium-ion batteries versus the derating mechanism that they put it into the UK. So there's a, you know, it depends what you mean by technology neutral, because you can easily cut one in and cut one out very specifically just by a shift in definition, and that's based on, you know, the responsiveness of certain kinds of technologies. So, I mean, I think from a finance perspective, what we're most interested to see is scale grow in a certain kind of technology so that it de-risks over time. The cost of funding come down, and with scale, there's a better understanding of the opportunities. There's better education within the financial community. And then, you know, that's when you can see some very exciting stuff that start to get delivered at scale down to the, you know, small, medium-sized level, the residential level. If that's where we're going to, then certainly kind of making sure that you back the technology that you want to see go forth is probably the agenda that you should adopt.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that makes sense. I think that touches up on a really important point. In order to make such business models work, you know, you need clarity from the regulatory side. You need to be able to de-risk the assets that you're developing. I think that takes us to a point within the clean energy package that for me is quite unclear so far, and I'm not quite sure how it will be kind of resolved, and that's really the double charging debate. And obviously that exists in the UK, that exists in each of the domestic markets within continental Europe, and it exists on a European level. And it's a big challenge, because how can you develop a strong business model if you're being double charged every time you discharge a battery with electricity? So maybe Andrea, you can pick this one up, because to me, you know, that charge or the way you are double charged basically erodes the business case in many places. So what's your view on, is the energy package clear enough on that? Should it be changed? Maybe what's your view from France, from Italy, on how that's developing?
I think that, of course, there is an issue with network charging, and I don't know if the energy package would be the right place to solve all these issues, which are often related to specificities of each national electricity market. Of course, I think that a good and sound approach would be to define network tariffs in order to reflect the cost generated by users, including storage facilities. So, of course, the evolution towards, for example, more time of use tariffs reflecting the costs induced by users in different times of the day could facilitate, for example, the business case for storage technologies, and there are other specific evolutions which could help to integrate these facilities, but keeping always an economic sound approach, in the sense that the objective is to incentivize an efficient use of the network. That could be the final outcome, and storage couldn't be charged more than what it induces in terms of cost for the system. And if it guarantees some cost savings, this could be reflected in network charging. That's a clear point, and I think that this is one of the points where the regulatory framework could evolve without a big revolution, but just adapting what there is today in order to meet the challenges of tomorrow.
Okay, great. No, I certainly think that's a good position. And Dominique, maybe what's your view on this? Do you think that double charging debate, you know, merits more depth, merits a more dedicated discussion, or what's your view on that? How do you agree with Andrea? Or potentially?
Well, basically, the double charge, is it really a problem? Because if I take the French example, I see that we don't charge at all injection, production at distribution level. So there is no charge for injection, so there is no double charge. And for a transmission level, we only charge the very, very high tension level, 400,000 kilovolt, and it's kind of a small overhead related to the losses. So this is the French case. So this is not an issue in France, but I I am aware of, it's not a regulation, but it's guidelines from CEER, so at European level, which recommends to have very low injection tariffs in order, obviously, to have a level playing field on the wholesale markets. So I don't know the precise situation elsewhere in Europe, but if there is some injection charge, it has to be very low. So, well, maybe I'm wrong, but for France, it's not an issue, I would say. And I think in most other countries, it shouldn't be a big issue. But even 50 cents per megawatt hour may be too much.
I mean, from where I stand, I think it's a very significant issue in some of the markets, including the UK and even Germany, because you basically punish a storage asset and they have to contribute to at least to the network charges that are part of an electricity tariff. So there's some clearing up. I mean, in Germany, for example, they've recently cleared the way that behind the meter assets can actually participate in mixed business models, and there's a lot of changes going on within the UK system in order to kind of mitigate the impact of that. But yeah, I mean, in a lot of countries, we think it is certainly still a big barrier if you're looking to provide multiple services. So it's quite interesting actually to get that French perspective. And I think that takes me really nicely to actually one question we've had from the audience, which is related to the French market. So maybe while we're talking about France, let's go straight to that. You know, obviously there is some capacity market mechanisms within the French market. Yeah. And do you see that storage can participate in that market technically, which, you know, if it can, what are the kind of remuneration mechanisms, and is it actually competitive within the capacity market options within France? I know it is quite important in the UK, for example. So what's the view from France there?
I don't see any barrier for storage assets to participate in the capacity markets. What I'm sure at the moment is that demand response assets or facilities, I don't know, they are participating, and it's not ridiculous as the global part. So I don't see any barrier for storage, but at the moment I'm not sure that other than steps are, I don't know the English word, but they are hydraulic storage. They obviously are participating in the French capacity market. But I don't see any barrier. And again, it's a competitive market. So if storage assets are competitive, then they will participate in the capacity market, and they will be selected, and they will earn the money with it.
Okay, interesting. And Andrea, any view from you on the French capacity market?
Pumped hydraulic storage can participate, of course, in capacity market. I think one of the main evolution of these years of the capacity market rules in France is notably the definition of specific rule for the participation of batteries. So even if Dominic is right, there are no formal barriers, but in the future there will be probably some specific rules facilitating and adapted to the participation of these kind of technologies in the capacity markets, especially in terms of availability and availability schemes, etc. So that's one of the evolution foreseen by the TSO RTE for this year.
Okay, interesting, great stuff. And maybe that takes us then on quite nicely. I mean, I want to just quickly recap maybe what we've discussed so far. I mean, we've had a pretty good and pretty lively discussion with lots of different views, and also I think a clear view on the kind of core question of today's webinar around agreement on DSO, TSO ownership of storage within frameworks. I think everyone agrees really that DSOs, TSOs shouldn't really be the owner and operator of a storage asset. I don't think that's what's going to happen as part of the clean energy package, and it's not happening on many country levels. So I think we've kind of answered that question. So maybe what we should do is we've got about 10-15 minutes left for today's webinar. We've got lots of questions coming in, and I think maybe let's take this debate a little bit further, latching onto the different revenue streams that are available. So maybe let's talk a little bit more about the business cases in France, in the UK, across Europe. And I think one of the core points which one of our attendees has brought out quite nicely is that growth of solar and wind, which obviously benefited from strong feed-in tariffs. So a lot of private capital flowing into the sector. And we're not really seeing that at the moment on the energy storage side, which is due to certain well, quite a few different factors, but maybe Jim, what's your view from your position, and why is not more private capital flowing into energy storage asset investment, especially in Europe?
There's been a couple of market signals, both by participants in the market as well as a regulator. So probably earlier last year, the triads regime was for front of the meter projects came under review, and for a long time, triads it's a way of grid upkeep being allocated to the 3 top half-hourly periods, and whoever is consuming energy in those periods in the UK, and that was a material source of revenue for a lot of fast response generation schemes. So a lot of these were gas peakers, diesel peakers. When triads came under review, that put a lot of nervousness onto the market. That would have been a main revenue stream for batteries as well, because their ability to avoid the triads for behind the meter customers, and even in some cases front of the meter. So triads came under review. The capacity market auction recently cleared at less than half of what it was since the last auction. So it cleared at £8.80 or £8.40. So that has to do with the sheer amount of sort of existing generation that's participating in these markets. But imagine you're an investor and you're taking you're developing a project midway through. It's 6 to 12 months. So development for long lead items, and all of a sudden the capacity market assumption drops by half. Your triads assumption go away, and all of a sudden the EFR market, so enhanced frequency response, was meant to be a 4-year contract for a lot of different market participants, and you had sort of a base case of where you thought the market would clear, and it came so well below that it was clear that there's so much participation, so much I guess different views and people having different agendas participating in these auctions, that you're getting some outcomes that discourage investment. So there's been a few different market signals that have made any investor trying to build a cash flow case think twice, again and again. And that's over the past 18 months. So that's what's made it a bit nervous in the UK. And clearly this might be different in other parts of the world. So I'm interested in hearing other people's opinion. Yeah,
great. Maybe Andrea, you can latch onto that. Obviously, Jim gave a really nice overview in the UK and how market signals keep changing, and it's very difficult to even know what's going to be happening in the next 3 months. So what's your view kind of looking across maybe continental Central Europe? Andrea, do you see same issues, or do you think maybe there's a lot more stability that allows private investors to build longer term business cases?
I admit I'm not an expert on this point. I'm more expert on the regulatory side. But of course, there are the markets are evolving, and the signals. It's difficult to have these long-term signals necessary to take investment decisions, not only for storage but for many assets related to the market. So the situation I believe for investors is not easy. As regards storage, I just wanted to add a point. I think it was mentioned the issue of demonstrator, and I think that's for an emerging technologies whose profitability is not always still not always there, but it will be probably in the very near future. I think demonstrators it's a good way to acquire expertise in the management and investment of these new technologies. And I think one of the key issues for the creating of the framework for good demonstrators is to enlarge the participation to all the actors which are available to make their expertise available for this kind of project. So TSOs and DSOs should not be the only stakeholders in this, but even facilities could participate in this demonstrator, as they do, as EDF does right now. I think it's an important point in order to go towards the profitability and to have a business rapidly a business case and a sound business case for these projects to develop them in a market framework.
No, absolutely. And I think what's important there, and this touches up on quite a few questions that we've just had from the audience, so I'm going to try to summarize them a little bit. But obviously this comes back to the point that energy storage needs to be able to provide a more holistic range of services. So be able to participate in wholesale markets for arbitrage, participate in ancillary services markets, let's say frequency, potentially provide services to the distribution operator, system operator, or to an end customer. So, I mean, this is really the holy grail where we all want to get, but right now this is not happening, and there's a lot of different barriers. So, what is needed within the market design to provide the right price signals? Because I think if you provide the right pricing signals, then even the calculation for the investor becomes a lot easier, because they know roughly, they know what the risk is, they know what potential revenues look like, and they can then look against kind of seeing how an asset stacks up against that. But I think right now we don't have the right market design to provide these price signals for all these markets to encourage storage. And it's not so much of a cost debate. I think it's more about a market design and pricing debate. So maybe Andrea, Dominique, what do you see needs to change there on the market design side to create that type of service or that type of price signal?
Maybe to clarify a bit, I would say that you have two questions, and you have to have the answers right to the two questions in order for storage to develop. First of all, it has to be competitive. For instance, if you have a market very much oversupplied with very little price differentials, then you can have the right signals, but storage won't develop, because it has not to develop, because storage in the end is about price differentials, at least on the markets. So first you have to have the right situation of the market, then you have to get the right price signals. I totally agree with that. We have to have the right network tariffs. And so we are in France in favor of time of use network tariffs, even for residential end users. And they have been introduced last year in France with 4 options, even for residential. So we think that this kind of signals, they should run everywhere in the market and up to the residential user. And then if you have those signals, and also you have the right price difference on the markets, then storage will develop. I agree with that. And regarding the market design, I think that you're also the question of long-term signals. And the clean energy package does address the question. It's only kind of a wish, saying that every rules in the market should have the goal to develop long-term signal, long-term contracts should be made possible, for instance, on exchanges. Well, at the moment, I see we have a good visibility for 3 years, I would say. We should go at least 5 years, maybe 7 years, I don't know. We should allow the PPAs, things like that, long-term contract with producers and end users, etc., etc. But in the end, you have to get some developer willing to take a risk. And the good thing is that if you develop more and more PV and wind, then you will end up with more and more periods with negative prices, like in Germany, and also periods with peaks. And then maybe investors they will be easy more willing to invest, because they see that the market is there. This is the first part. The second part is obviously network operators. They don't have to own the storage, but they may have some needs, so they may conduct tenders, and then this can be an additional revenue flow for storage owners, which maybe will be more secure than the markets. So, is it?
Absolutely, I think I would agree with you, and I think it'd be great to see more tenders from DSOs. But I think at the moment that's not really happening. And maybe Andrea, from your point of view, do you think it's not happening because the DSOs don't really know what they need? Do you think it's regulation that's stopping them from creating those type of services? Do they even have an interest? Because ultimately that undermines potentially their position to just very clearly say, this is how much money we need for the next period for maintaining our infrastructure. So we don't really want to competitively procure services.
I think I don't have I don't have the right answer I'm not working in DSO, but I think that I can imagine they are actually experiencing a big, maybe one of the biggest change in the way they manage their network. They face the necessity to actively manage the network, so they are increasingly try to identify what are the best way to do it. If, for example, create a market, a specific market for congestion management, or doing tendering. And all these elements are pretty complex already. The identification of the technical issues of the congestions and on the way to solve them. I think it's complicated. And then the creation of the market structures, the tendering procedures, the prescriptions for the capacity which are awarded, the tendering procedures, etc. All this takes time, I think, and also an evolution in their expertise and their way to manage the network. So I think that is something which should be done, and it's an evolution necessary because the level of distributed generation is so important that a passive management is no more possible. And I think that this delay is done because they need time also to adapt and to create these new market opportunities. But I think they should do it and do it in a possibly rapid way in order for this kind of markets to be developed. We see, for example, on the TSO side, this is easier because they are more used to do it, and some tendering possibly some auctions for congestion management are envisaged, for example, at the end of the Ringo Pro demonstrators in France. So I think something could also be done on the distribution side quite quickly.
Maybe a very good point on again on French system, but on the value of that for distribution networks. We published last October a study on flexibility valuation on distribution networks, and you have some, let's say, bad and good news. The bad news is that what we see is that distribution networks were designed with a kind of high security margins, because basically the operator were blind. They weren't seeing anything at the low voltage level because of the lack of smart meters. Now, with the deployment of smart meters, they are becoming more and more precise in managing network, so they can lower the safety margins. And so what we see is that there is a kind of not very high value for flexibility. The figure is estimated between 20 and 60 million euros per year. Needed flexibility for distributed networks in France. This is the bad news, I would say, which is not very high. The good news is that the more and more PV and wind will develop in the next years, and the more and more this value will grow. This is the good perspective. But at the moment, the value is not so big at distribution level.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's very location specific as well. In some places you have a higher value, in some places there's no need whatsoever. So I certainly would agree with that. Now I'm a bit conscious of time here because we're running towards the end of our webinar. So there's really only two more questions I would address to all of you. So we'll have one final question and maybe a couple of closing statements from each of our panelists today. I just like this question. I wanted to pick it up because it's a little bit contentious, really, and maybe get whoever wants to jump on this first. But do you think there's actually a reason that we don't see more tenders or more open regulation to storage within Europe, which, let's say, storage today is mainly lithium-ion batteries? So is the reason we don't see a more open approach the fact that actually we do not have any significant production capacities in European countries? So in a sense, if we are creating a more open market or more open framework within Europe, we are just helping the battery manufacturers of Korea, Japan, and China. So is that maybe a more strategic thinking at a European level? Do you think that's feasible, or do you think this is just a conspiracy?
I don't have an immediate view on this one. I would have thought it would be, you know, and you can only imagine how objective we might be about looking at projects that need to be developed, and you know, the security of supply, and the needs of consumers, the needs of producers, and things like that, to balance that off against, you know, China's massively subsidized sort of state-backed electric vehicle push into the world. You know, that if we choose to not participate in that, there might be a lot of things that we also choose to not participate in. You know, it seems inevitable, but who knows what might happen at the higher echelons of you know, government. So I'll leave it at that.
Anyone else got a different view on that one? I think we're just kind of guessing quite wildly, but you know, do you think there's anything behind that theory? Andrea, you're smiling.
No, I don't have rational ideas behind.
Well, I would say that this is a question made mostly for the automotive industry, because this is a very strategic issue for the automotive sector in Europe, which is very strong. And so I think the energy sector will more or less follow on that. And it's not because we will run or not some tenders by DSOs or DSO that something will change at the world level on the battery industry. Yes.
No, absolutely. I would agree with that. Great. That's a fun little question just to end today's debate, just make it a little bit more interesting towards the end. So just to finish off, hopefully everyone attending the webinar has enjoyed the discussion. I think we've had a very wide-ranging discussion that's gone into a lot of different areas that maybe have been expected from the initial topic. So just quickly recap, we talked about kind of current regulation and current definitions within the clean energy package and how that's likely developing, with DSO, TSOs not really in a position to own or operate energy storage. We've looked maybe at some of the key differences between some of the European countries, but also the US, and looked at how storage can be financed in the US, how it's easier to create a value stack over there, but also maybe that what's lacking at times isn't just the market signals or the market designs, it's still project developers taking or not willing to take the risk, and maybe also just the cost not being competitive in a lot of markets, with France being the obvious example here, with low electricity tariffs and you know, a lot of secure generation with the nuclear fleet. So maybe to leave things off, I'd just kind of like to pose one final question to each of our panel members. So really in one short sentence, you know, if you would have a Christmas wish list and you'd have to say, for storage to develop within Europe or within France or the UK, whichever market you want to pick, what's the number one thing that needs to really change that in your eyes would advance and accelerate the deployment of energy storage? Dominique, let's start with you. You're just on the screen.
One easy one for me, this is to have the right price signals all along the chain, and just up to the end user. If the end user has no price differentials, then there is no incentive at all for any kind of storage behind the meter. So it's for the regulatory authorities to set up the right price signals with natural tariffs, and also the right market design for the wholesale market, obviously, but also for the retail market.
Great. Andrea, do you want to go next?
Yeah, if we keep to the regulation side, I think it's a regulatory framework allowing for the participation of storage in all different market segments, with specific rules which preserve the level playing field with other technology, but which allows storage to maximize the value they can provide to the market, could be a very valuable evolution for the development of this kind of technology.
Great. No, I certainly would agree with that. And Jim, from a project financing side, what do you want to happen? Stability, finally?
A time warp. Go 2 years into the future where battery prices become so substantially lower that that we're not bickering over a small drop in capacity market prices or the removal of a certain kind of battery regime. Batteries should become wildly economic at some point. And just to get to that day, and right now it's just a trade-off between the cost of the battery over the revenue streams. And I think the revenue streams are so hard to change and to guarantee over time that the only part left of the equation is the cost of the battery itself. And we know that's coming down because there are certain manufacturers out there that own the entire supply chain. So, you know, it's really just keeping an eye on that, and hopefully that goes fast along, and, you know, and the projects that anybody's working on is at the right part of that curve.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I would agree with all three of your points. I think that's a very nice end to today's session. So first of all, thank you very much, Andrea, Dominique, Jim. Really appreciate you taking the time and discussing this with me today. Hopefully to all the attendees, this was a fruitful, useful discussion. If you have any questions, please get in touch. And, you know, if you enjoyed today's debate, come join us in Berlin from the 14th till 18th of May for the Energy Storage World Forum. Actually, I think all four of us will be presenting there and be quite keen to take up and pick up the discussion that we are finishing now. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you to our speakers, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.